This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, the phenomenal jazz guitarist Joe Negri, began performing on radio at the tender age of 3. Playing the ukulele and singing. In the 1940s, he toured nationally and was featured with the Shep Fields Orchestra before joining the Army for 2 years. After returning home to Pittsburgh, he performed locally with his brother, pianist Bobby Negri. He enrolled at Carnegie Mellon University, concentrating on music composition. He also taught guitar to students, including Ralph Patt, the inventor of major thirds tuning. Joe Negri and Ralph Patt would go on to record together in 1989. Joe spent more than 20 years working in television as a music director. He worked with Pittsburgh TV notables like Ricki Wertz of Ricki and Copper, Hank Stohl, and Paul Shannon. Eventually, he would meet the legendary Fred Rogers and would appear for 40 years as Handyman Negri in the beloved children's program Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. For all those reasons and many more, I am truly thrilled to welcome to StoryBeat a man who I grew up watching and admiring, the brilliant Joe Negri. Joe, what a great honor it is for me to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Oh, Steve, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, trust me, the pleasure is all mine. So, Joe, when I've watched you play over the years, going all the way back to when I was a kid watching you, and even today when I watch you online, I can tell that you truly love what you're doing. It shows. It comes through. How much does passion for a piece of music factor into how you wind up playing it?
Well, I think it's such a big factor, really. You know, to enjoy the melody. I'm a big fan of melody. You know, so if I have a song with a great melody, I really enjoy it. And the other thing I enjoy is kind of adding harmonization and maybe some substitutions and, you know, enriching it and that sort of thing. I don't take it, there's a term in music, particularly in jazz, the term is vanilla, which means kind of plain, you know, just plain basic 1, 4, 5 chords.
Straight ahead.
Yeah, although I believe very strongly that's how harmonies are built on that structure, but you can take that 4 chord and you can make it into something a lot richer. You can take that 5 chord and you can really embellish on it and alter it and give it a richness. So that's what I kind of concentrate on when I'm playing.
And you know, and obviously, when you're developing melodies and songs and whatever you're developing, or whether you're writing them themselves, do you think about the audience and how does the audience play into your figuring out what you're doing?
You know, Steve, I have to credit that childhood upbringing of mine. I have always had an awareness of the audience. It's something I grew up with, and I think it was because I started as a kid, and it was funny. We had a little act, my brother Bobby, who you mentioned before, and we had a cousin, Harold, and the 3 of us were called the Rhythm Boys, and the act was me opening up with a song with my ukulele.
Okay.
And then taking the uke back to the wing and handing it to my dad, and then going into our tap dance routine, you know.
Oh, you tap dance as well?
Yeah, we would go out and do a tap dance routine. So, you know, at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, we were really performers, and I think that has had a big influence on me.
No doubt. You've been doing it basically forever.
Pardon me?
You've been doing it more or less forever.
Yeah, I have. People always tell me, like, I used to play a lot of club dates, at the fancy country clubs in Pittsburgh. I did a lot of work for Mrs. Hillman.
Sure.
And people like that, So people would always say to me, geez, how do you know how to pick the songs that people like? Well, I really am tuned into the audience. If it's a younger audience, I try to, go a little bit in that direction. If it's an older audience, I stick with the American Songbook, which basically is my repertoire, really, the American Songbook.
And from my perspective, you can't go wrong with that songbook.
No, I don't think you can. I've always been a fan of the Gershwins, of Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, Richard Rodgers, all of them. I mean, and then I'm a big jazz buff, too, I loved Bird and Diz, and I loved all of that.
Did you ever cross paths with any of those people on the road?
I did meet Dizzy a couple of times. Gillespie, very, very outgoing guy, talk about a showman. Oh, boy, really nice, I never met Charlie Parker. I would have loved to. I met several of the top guitarists, including people like Jim Hall, Johnny Smith, and Jimmy Rainey, Tal Farlow. So I've been friends with a lot of those guitar players who I call that the what do you call it? The ideal years, when guitar was really in its prime.
Oh, sure.
Guitar. Yeah.
I think guitar is still, I don't think guitar has ever really gone out of fashion. It's still around.
Oh, no, it's still very popular. It's just the styles have changed, and the playing is a bit different today. Did
I read once that you had some interaction with Gene and Fred Kelly?
Yeah, well, see, that goes back to that showbiz again. Did you ever hear that funny story that we get a knock on the door, and we go to the door, and there's these two very well-dressed gentlemen standing at the door. My mother comes in from the kitchen. She's been canning tomatoes, and she's got an apron on with tomato sauce on her, And so they come in, and they introduce themselves as Gene and Fred Kelly. And my brother and I had been kind of jamming, and he was banging at the piano, and I was probably playing my little guitar. And he said, "That's the act I want." And my dad goes, "What act? It's no act." My brother, he says, he can't even play the piano. But Fred and Gene liked it. So they actually took me to several of their shows. I remember one in particular was Johnstown, where we played a theater there for the Kellys, and I did a couple of things like that with them.
That's.
But my brother wasn't in it yet. It was still too early.
Well, just the fact that you did that prior to Gene Kelly becoming Gene Kelly. That's pretty amazing. And very shortly after that, he went off to New York, and before you know it, he was in Pal Joey.
I guess.
Yeah, Pal Joey, sure.
No.
Wasn't it Pal Joey? I think it was.
In one of those big ones.
Yeah, and then that turned into Hollywood.
Yeah, and then he turned that into Hollywood.
Right. So obviously you've been playing for quite some time. I'm wondering, do you still practice every day?
Well, I don't know if we'd call it practicing, but I do try to pick up the guitar every day. I've slowed down a little bit within the last 6 months, but I still keep it up. And I go to teach 2 times a week.
Is that right?
And that's quite a session for me.
Where do you teach,
I play
Joe?
along with the students and go over techniques and go over all kinds of chordal stuff, and I improvise with them, I comp for them, all that stuff. So I really get to do that.
And where is it that you teach? Is it Carnegie Mellon?
No, I'm teaching one day at Pitt and one day at Duquesne.
I got it.
I've been at both places. Duquesne just honored me this past summer. They had a Joe Negri Guitar Day, which actually shocked the heck out of me. I've been there 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Pitt, I think I was even there a year before. Pitt was interesting because I got a call from the dean back then, and he said, we'd like to start a jazz guitar program. What do you think? And I said, sure, I'd love to. So we began very, very gently with about 2 or 3 students.
Mm-hmm.
And then it developed. Now I have an assistant there named John Mayoni, so he has 5 or 6, and I'm curtailing mine. I'm down to about 3.
And that keeps your hand in that world, the world of teaching. Do you enjoy it?
It does. And we talk, we talk legitimate guitar. We talk about stuff that was done by the early guitarists. Sometimes I have them play solos by Eddie Lang and Carl Kress, and the original chordal style guitar players.
Right, right. And do you enjoy the teaching? Do you enjoy doing that sort of work?
Very much. I really do. I look forward to it. I've thought about dropping out, and what the hell? It's a few hours a day, and I really enjoy it, and I enjoy the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids seem to be, grabbing on to jazz, although for the most part, I can tell they have to be able to do other things, like play the blues, maybe do some rap, even join a rock band if they want to make a few bucks.
Oh, sure. And that, by the way, is getting ever more challenging in that world because most of the people that create music today are not making a lot of money off of recordings anymore. They have to go play on the road.
That's right, Steve. Yeah.
I mean,
I kind of feel for them because my era was a lot more musical. I didn't have to make so many compromises. You know what I mean?
I do.
They said what we did sometimes on the club dates was commercial music, but actually, if you're playing Begin the Beguine, Night and Day, Can't Get Started With You, I don't know how commercial that is.
Well, back then it was, but today not so much. Now they're standards.
Yeah, right.
When you are developing a piece of music or a song, do you go through some kind of a regular routine when you're doing an arrangement or when you're writing something? Is there a routine that you standardly do, or does every piece come out in a unique way?
Yeah, I do have kind of a routine. What I do is I sit down with the guitar and manuscript paper and a pencil. And so I actually play, what I'm going to do. What did I just do the other day? I was working on a Cole Porter medley. So I started off with All Through the Night. And so I play through it and write down what I'm doing, and then I went into another song. I don't know if you remember a Cole Porter song called After You Who. It's really nice.
I'm not sure that I do.
Rare.
It's one that doesn't get played much?
Easy to Love. So I'm still kind of working on that. I kind of cleaning it up and finishing it up. Now, when I'm done, I'll take it to the computer, and I've been working with Finale, which is the computer, the Apple way of writing manuscripts.
Right.
So I've been doing it. Then I'll take my rough draft and I'll take it to the computer and put it on Finale.
Are you able to then make arrangements within the computer as well?
No, I just pretty much copy what I've done on my rough draft.
Got it. And so how do you then take it to the next step? Do you then, if you're going to arrange it for a band or an orchestra or something?
Yeah, I haven't been doing that. I've been just doing guitar solos, and I have quite a few of them. I have I call it one guitar. So I have a volume 1, a volume 2, and a volume 3 that's in the works. Mm-hmm. Volume 1 and volume 2 are actually in print. I have a wonderful book on visualization of the fingerboard.
Right.
I call it a triadic approach. It's similar to what you were saying about our old friend, the guitar player.
Ralph Patt.
Yeah. So what it is triads and inversion of the triads and looking at them in different positions on the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tell my students, the guitar is a pretty complex matter. When you look down at the piano keyboard, you've got 12 notes and they repeat. But when you look at the guitar, you play an F chord in first position, in fifth position, in seventh position, in 12th position. You can play it 5 different ways.
Sure.
So that's what makes the guitar pretty complicated.
So I'm not a musician, though I've been in the music business for a fair amount of time. I've written a lot of lyrics for songs, including a show that's been on Broadway. But so I'm not, when you're talking music and musicianship, it's always fascinating to me because I don't do it. So what has always interested me in watching guitar players play is that you go down the board in order to get to the higher notes. So,
exactly.
So it's almost counterintuitive.
Down the board, and you go to the lower strings to get the low notes.
Right. Right. And so that always interested me, that you have to, naturally you might think that if you went higher, it would go higher, but in fact it's the other way around.
Just for example, the low E string is an E, a low E, about an octave and a half below middle C on the piano.
Mm-hmm.
So the top, the first string is another E 2 octaves above that. And then the 12th fret of the guitar is another E an octave above that, So we have quite a range on that instrument,
Oh, yes.
From that low E, we can go all the way up, if your fingers will reach it, to a C above high C,
And the other thing that I love about guitar that you can get in some other instruments, but that the guitar seems to have more depth of emotion than almost any other instrument.
I think it does. I really do. And I think it's a great accompanying instrument, I think it works well with singers. I've had so much wonderful memories and good times with vocalists. Gee, I worked with Michael Feinstein for about a year or so, and he was really very special, and he just especially likes guitar playing.
Mm-hmm.
He came to the Pittsburgh Pops to do a concert, and I happened to be the guitarist in the orchestra. And just spontaneously out of nowhere, I think we sang a Gershwin song, and right afterwards, he immediately started using me. He would take me on little private parties with him and different things, and then he asked me to go on the road with him, and we actually recorded an album together. So it was fun. It was really fun.
He's about as expert on Gershwin as anyone, I imagine.
Yeah, he really is.
Yeah.
And my other favorite singer was, I don't know if you remember her, Maureen Budway.
I do remember her vaguely.
Her brother was David, a real good pianist who's in New York now.
Mm-hmm.
And Maureen unfortunately passed away of cancer a few years ago. But people like that, I really enjoyed working with singers.
So going back to songs themselves, for you, are you able to consciously identify what makes a good song good? Is there something that tells you it's a good song? It's a hard question.
That's a really good question, yeah. Well, obviously the melody, the form sometimes, you take a standard form, which is an A, and then that A repeats, and then you have a bridge, and then you have another A on the end, so they call that AABA. Well, you take a song like All the Things You Are, and it doesn't follow that form at all. It's kind of there's an A, and there's a B, and there's another section that's even a C, and, so that makes a song like All the Things You Are exceptionally special,
And so when you're looking for songs to play, what do you do? Do you go to the various books, or fake books or song books, and do you look for stuff?
Well, I really don't. I kind of go to my memory now, and just play stuff from my. I do have a list that I take with me because I'm not real good at popping up with the name of a song.
Right.
I do have a list of Gershwin, Porter, and Rodgers and Hart.
And if somebody from the audience threw a title at you, would you be pretty good at just playing it?
Pardon me? Oh, yeah. If somebody... Yeah, I've always been pretty... People get amazed at that when they call out a tune, and I can always go into it.
Well, I would say that's a pretty amazing, talent to have, is that you could just pop them out without even thinking too hard,
Yeah.
Most people can't do that. So what would you say, especially going back to your students now, what are the most common mistakes that young musicians make in general? Not the specific mistakes, but about the business or about playing an instrument. What are the general mistakes that you see commonly?
Some of the most common mistakes are, for example, learning scales. There are forms to the scales, and so you have these 5 forms, and I try to give them to them, and they kind of are kind of a little lukewarm about nailing them down, and they really should, because by knowing the scales, you can find the different positions on the board. Now, the other thing is they'll play in first position, which is like where every guitar player plays, C, F, G, 7, C. All right? So they'll play there and know the notes there. Oh, we're talking about reading. So they get the 5th position. It's the same notes, but they can't read them on the fingerboard.
Mm-hmm.
Are you following me?
Sort of.
Yeah, they'll find the C on the 2nd string and on the 1st fret, but you go to the 5th fret to find the other C. They can't read that, they can't. And reading is probably their biggest drawback. They were really slow in getting around to reading, and it's becoming a little more serious. The readers are just not as good as they were 10 years ago.
Well, I'll tell you something. I think that is true everywhere with this current generation. I teach at Point Park, and one of the things that I see on a regular basis is, and you talk about reading, they don't want to read. They don't want to read books or anything. They don't want to read.
Well, very good, very good.
So it's that is a real challenge. I think that the computer, and more importantly, the cell phone, has changed the way that people look at the world. And
I was telling you about my triadic approach.
Yes.
I mean, if you find a little C triad in the middle of the guitar, well, then you can just go do ba da ba da, make a melody off of it. But you're visualizing that C chord, or an F chord, or whatever chord you have to play over. You're at least visualizing something. You're not just kind of like, out there in no man's land,
Right. So
my point with all the students is, you've got to have some concept of what this board's about and what these chords are about, and then you can improvise. You can do whatever you want with them as far as playing melodies,
Well, yeah. At what point in your young life, when you were playing at 3 and so on, at what point did you figure that you actually understood this so well that you thought, hey, I'm pretty good at this?
Oh, well, I started out by doing transcriptions at 16 years old, of Charlie Christian, and listening to Charlie Parker later, and following. I had certain idols that I, try to emulate.
Mm-hmm.
Then eventually, by my mid-20s or so, especially after I went to Carnegie Mellon and studied some composition, got a little theory under my belt, I kind of moved into my own world. And then, although Bird is still an idol, and I still kind of, I think, improvise in that style and that format, but I do my own thing.
And so
my thing, Steve, is really, I like to play melodies. I don't like to ramble all over the guitar and play a bunch of notes.
Well, I can tell you, if I hear you without seeing, nobody says to me it's Joe Negri, I can tell it's you playing. You have a very distinct style. There's something about what you do that's very much you.
Yeah, some people say, some students will come up to me and say, I played a solo the other night, and somebody come up and said, "You sound just like Joe Negri," which is kind of it's kind of a drag, I guess. But
I don't know. I think that's a compliment for both of you. That's a compliment for them and
I
you.
guess it is.
It's important for a musician to develop his or her own voice on the instrument.
Exactly, and I really emphasize that.
That your students get an emphasis on that they must develop their own voice.
That's right. They got to do their own
and
thing.
That's why you get people like Charlie Parker and Joe Negri, because we can identify them.
Thank you.
What have you learned about playing guitar over all these years that you wish you had known from the very start?
Oh boy. I wish I would have known more about theory. When I started, I was pretty much a by ear player, although I did learn to read. My teacher, Vic Lawrence, did teach me to read, so I could read, which was a blessing, because when I went on the road, that was the thing that got me in there, because the Shep Fields Orchestra featured guitar, and everything was kind of written, and I had to play lines with the horns and everything.
Right.
I had to read. One day, Tal Farlow visited me in Philadelphia, and he came backstage and he said, "Can I see some of your music?" And I brought the book over, and he looked at it, and he said, "Do you actually read those notes?" Because Tal didn't read it at all,
Really?
He was so impressed with that.
Well, that is impressive.
And my other thing was, Steve, my goal, my dream was to wind up in the studio. And if I would have gone to the studio, well, darn well, I would have had to have been a good reader.
Of course.
They just put things in front of you, and you have to do it. That's it. That's all there is to it.
Oh, the great studio musicians, they just absolutely, they get
yeah,
it.
Tony Mottola was one of my idols, and those guys, they could read anything. They could read anything on the page.
Was the great Johnny Costa that way too?
Yeah, Johnny was quite a good reader. He was a little bit independent as far as his piano playing. He kind of not rebelled, but he didn't go along with the classical piano that they wanted him to learn at Carnegie Mellon. He was Johnny Costa,
and he had a very unique playing style. His style with his hands was very unique. And
it was a little Tatum-ish, Art Tatum.
Yep, a little bit. And you know who else he reminded me of? He reminds me, in an odd way, of Chico Marx.
Oh, really?
Yes, where the hands are flying around a little bit more than the average piano player. So I think that Johnny Costa, I remember him quite vividly, and how wonderful a player he was.
Well, he was a character and very funny. And
so, okay, so I've only got a couple more questions for you today. How do you keep yourself in shape to play? Do you do special exercises for your hands and arms and shoulders and so on?
Not especially. I think the only way I keep myself in shape is by practicing. I usually start off by practicing some scales. I have some exercises where I do finger stretching kind of on a slow thing before I'll get into it. Maybe 15 minutes of that, and then I'll just go from there.
Okay, so I would call you blessed in that way, because many people, as they get past their 40s and 50s, things start to become less flexible. And so obviously you've kept your flexibility over all these years.
I do walk every day, and I do go to the gym about 3 times a week. So, I try to keep myself in shape.
So I would be remiss if I let you go without asking you about Fred Rogers, because he's all the rage at the moment again. And you worked with him for decades. What lessons would you say that you took away from Fred Rogers that would be good for us in today's world?
That we're all kind of special, and that we're all very unique, and each one of us has our own unique personality and our own message to tell.
Isn't that wonderful?
I think that's what I took away from him.
Because I would love to have had Mr. Rogers back today, just to kind of lead us back into being people again. I think our world has become a little too harsh, and
I think so.
And it would be wonderful if we could get back to being kind to one another again. That would be a great thing.
I've been doing. I did a couple of documentaries, so I've kind of been reliving some of that a little bit, and I've been reading a book by Maxwell King called You Are My Friend, You Are Special.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny, Fred had quite a life, besides the show. He had a family and he had 2 boys, and, he had other interests too.
Sure.
He was an interesting guy.
And I know, I've also had David Newell on the show, Mr. McFeely. And,
yeah.
And he,
terrific guy. He's been a good friend of mine.
He's a fantastic guy, and it's been great to get to know him a little bit. So we're coming to the end of the show, and I'm going to ask you the last question of the day, which is, do you have a piece of advice or a tip for someone perhaps starting out in today's world of music?
Well, that's really a tough one. I would try to be as much as I could. I'd try to just be myself and do what I do, and be honest about it, and not try to fake anything or come on with things that you're not really 100% good at. Stick to what you know, and just be yourself.
Well, I think that's, being true to yourself, that's about as wonderful a piece of advice as anyone could receive. And I think that's very hard for someone starting out to do, because they're trying to figure out who and what they are.
Who and what they are, yeah. I've noticed so many people over the years that they develop almost like they were actors or something. They're playing some kind of role, and you can almost see through it. And I think that's very dangerous. I think you've got to find yourself and find your personality, and accept it for what it is. For example, I'm a little clumsy, but what are you going to do? I'm clumsy, so.
Now, I would never know that. You're the smoothest operator I've ever seen. You're as smooth as ice cream.
But when it comes to playing, I try to be as specific and particular as possible.
Well, for someone who I've admired literally my whole life, I would say that's just a true thing for you in particular, and a great piece of advice, because I can't think of anyone that I've watched my whole life who has been as true to who they are as you.
Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you for coming on StoryBeat today, Joe. This has been a great treat.
It's been a joy, Steve. I've enjoyed talking to you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.